didn't think about it. It was only after I started to give talks, while I was writing the book, I was giving talks, and it was as I was giving talks, most of them were for the pronunciation special interest group. I I was a member of that group, and I gave talks, and some people really liked the idea. A lot of people didn't, and that's when I realized that it was going to be a problem, much worse problem in the US than the UK.
Hmm.
But the problem was that for many people, it went against their own work, their own research, their own publications. And for teachers, it went against their teaching. And it caused a lot of insecurity. People had vested interests. A lot of people, the second book, I fold it up just so that you can see which one it is. That
Right.
one on attitude and identity really tried to look at the attitudes of people who were really against the whole thing, the whole idea of ELF and the ELF pronunciation. And they'd vested so much of their time and money in trying to acquire native English. A ridiculous thing was that they never did. As I used to joke in my talks, only spies ever acquired native English. You have to be smart. Nobody else requires the real native version of any
Right.
language except spies. I've never met anybody I've got a Danish friend. She's not in academia. She came over here at the age of 20 and she did nursing. She got married very quickly. She's had 2 children. Now she's got grandchildren. She's lived here all her life. And I can still occasionally hear something Danish in her pronunciation. It's occasional. She's lived here for 50 years. And some people, they always carry on speaking with a really strong accent from where they came from. But that's because they choose to do that, whether it's conscious or not. They choose it because they identify with that place. But my Danish friend very much identifies with here. But she still hasn't, if she was to spy, they would pick it up, but she wouldn't get through.
That's how we know who's a spy.
Yikes. Okay.
It's a fascinating thing, Andrew, Mike, and Jenny, what you're saying, because there's a cognitive bias, which is the sunk cost fallacy. And it sounds like what you're describing, Jenny, is that a lot of teachers they've been making this decision to teach English using what do they call not the intelligibility, the nativeness principle, as Robin and John Levy's also on the podcast talked about that. And yeah, it's basically this idea that they're going to be doing it because they've invested so much time, they've been doing it for so long, and now this person comes in and tells me that what we're doing is not right, it should be done in a completely different way. But they've already invested so much time, so much money, all their training, and then eventually to actually rethink that and change their mind, do things from a different perspective. It's really hard for human beings to do that in general.
No, I never patronized. I always said, if having heard the arguments, you still prefer to learn to speak like a native speaker of English, do it. You probably won't be successful, but try.
Yeah.
I never said that people should do what my research shows. I'm saying that it's more relevant.
Right.
If you don't like it, don't do it. Carry on doing what you want and carry on teaching the way you want if you feel that's what your learners. But of course, that's what the learners need when it comes to the test.
We're going to get to that test, but I wanted to ask you a question because you were talking about criticism, and I actually talked to some people in the past who have also said things about your work. I remember mentioning English as a lingua franca at the time, and a lot of teachers have told me like, yeah, I don't think ELF is for me. And usually the argument that I hear when we teach pronunciation focusing primarily on suprasegmentals or focusing on aspects of pronunciation that will lead to a lack of intelligibility, a lot of the people that I talk to, Jenny, they tell me that ELF may lower the standards of English, especially in academic or professional contexts. I would love to hear you respond to that because I feel like people would need to hear that. What do you have to say to someone who argues that?
I'd say it's purely an attitude. There's nothing particularly better or worse about any pronunciation. It is simply your attitude to that pronunciation. And if you have the attitude that native English is superior kind of English, then you're going to say you're lowering the standard if you have an elf approach. It's much the same in regional native accents. If you look at, say, take the words cake, because I'm a bit RP, I can't help it. I was brought up. It's modified. I do have a lot of stops as well. But if you say cake with an A sound, the diphthong, when my son was at his primary school mixing with a lot of local kids who didn't have to university teaching from the south of England. Actually, my husband wasn't from the south. He from up north, but with a very posh mother. And my son, on one occasion when my mother-in-law was staying, he asked for some cake. And she said to him, "Cake? What's cake?" And it's purely attitude. She thought that was sort of cockney, what later would have been called estuary English or, London English, South London. We all had South London English, really. His was more pronounced than mine. But it's the same attitude that you hear a sound or a pronunciation, and because of your attitude to the people who use that, you then think that is inferior. So it's exactly the same with non-native English accents. You feel that's an inferior speaker of English because you think I, the native speaker, own the English language, even though there's only a tiny minority of my group, and there's a huge number of that group with different kinds of it. But you feel you are superior, and therefore your accent is superior, and therefore anybody else's accent, any non-native English accent, is wrong, is inferior. And if you let that go through in your teaching, you are lowering the bar. I guess that's would be what I think.
Yeah.
I don't agree with it, obviously, but I think that's what people think.
Yeah.
Some probably still do.
No, it's true. It's true. And you've mentioned this because I think I remember reading one of your papers and you were talking about the role of English, specifically in higher education. And you've pointed out, you've talked a lot about universities, particularly in the UK, where international students are somewhat expected to conform to native norms. It's the same in Canada, not very different here. In terms of approaches, in terms of practicality, what do you think institutions, universities, higher education institutions, what do you think they could do, or how should they adjust to accommodate this global nature of English, or global English as you described in your book?
It's difficult. It's difficult in different contexts. It would be different. In my context, I can only speak the first-hand experience of what happened in Southampton. And it was quite interesting because when I first went there, in my department, which was then called Modern Languages, it's now called Cultures, Languages and Linguistics. Then it went through various name changes to incorporate the linguistics because we did feel we were very left out, and yet we were the people that attracted most of the students. And they didn't like ELF, and they certainly didn't like my view to English in higher education. And at that time, we had, when I was writing the book on English as a lingua franca in the International University, came out in 2014, and I did some research in my own university. But and I did websites from all around the world as well. But at that time, Southampton University had, for international students, as they called them, they had pronunciation classes taught by an actor. And I can't remember exactly what is that website, but I have published it in something or other I've written.
Never heard of such thing.
It was horrendous, and they were going to learn. It said you will learn to speak like a native English. But in higher education, it's a problem. It's such social injustice to expect people to use English like native English speakers, whichever country they're in. And if they're in the UK, they're going to find themselves, certainly at postgraduate level, in classes of 95% from around the world outside native speaking, English speaking countries. They're going to be ELF groups, basically. And the idea they should, but what's interesting is my department has moved on dramatically. They've taken loads of the criteria out of their assessment for marking presentations, and even there's a written work. They no longer have anything to do with native English in it. And I think were very influenced by me and then the colleagues, because I ended up seeing through about 30 PhD students, some of whom I think, I'm trying to remember how many, I think 4 of whom are teaching there, actually got lectureships there. So this is quite a strong influence, but they changed their views. And I think that's how you would do it. You would have to have people in Japan, for example. I've got 2 of my ex-PhD, I can't remember now, definitely one PhD student who I now work with and write with. He's very ELF informed and he is very much promoting it.
What's his name?
Tomoko Ishikawa. Oh no, Tomokazu. I always call him Tomo. I never remember what Tomo stands for. Tomokazu Ishikawa. And he's at a university in the north. Oh God, I could send you his email address. Okay. I don't have it with me now, but I can. Okay. He's very good. He would be a very good podcast for you. But then there's Kumiko Murata, who I remember her following me round at one of the TESOL conferences in the US, I think 2002 in Salt Lake City. And I gave a talk, and a big plenary talk. And afterwards, she said to me, "You're too kind to non-native speakers." Those were her exact words to me. "You're too kind to non-native speakers." And she really obviously didn't think too much about ELF. But 10 years later, she was setting up projects and getting funding to do ELF research.
There you go.
She's retired now, but she was at Waseda. And I think she has changed views there with the work she's done.
The question of if teachers need to earn more money to stay in ELT is really the wrong question these days. That one's largely been answered with precarity, 0-hour contracts, inconsistent work. The question isn't, do I need to earn more? The question really is, how do I make it work? Our TAP program, or Teacher Accelerator program, works with teachers like you directly to help make it happen. Through the process of being in the program, we help teachers build a lean, profitable, and pedagogically sound teaching business. 3 pillars that are really important to us. We started Learn Your English based on pedagogy, responsive pedagogy, evidence-supported teaching through research. One of the reasons we started this podcast as well. And we apply that now working with teachers to build courses, offers, and support for their clients in the same manner. The TAP program really is your roadmap to monetize your skills by, number 1, creating an irresistible offer, number 2, selling it effectively, and number 3, securing consistent clients, 3 pillars of any successful business. And while no one in ELT is building multi-million-dollar businesses in this fashion, it's a way for you and for all of us to first stay in the industry, to work with people that we love to help, to get paid for our work. And our goal for anyone who joins us in the program is within a 6 to 12 month period, you can make an informed choice, meaning you've built your business up to a certain point where you can use information to decide if keeping your school job and your business or just doing the business on its own is the right choice for you. If you want more information on if the program is a good fit for you or how we would work together, there's a link below. You can book a free chat with us. We can go through all of the details. There's lots of resources on our landing page, our website, and on this YouTube channel as well. And lots of interviews with clients that we've worked with where you can hear their stories, what it was like, and see if that resonates with you. If you're looking to earn a little bit more and really establish yourself in your niche, in your field this year, we'd love to chat. And now, let's get back to the show.
Hej, jag heter Rebecca och jag kommer ifrån Sverige och du lyssnar på Teacher Talking Time, the Learn Your English podcast. Hi, my name is Rebecca and I'm from Sweden and you're listening to the Teacher Talking Time, the Learn Your English podcast.
I want to go back to the exams now. Because like your research suggests that exams like IELTS, TOEFL, and now even probably Duolingo exams are not and I quote you, effective predictors of academic success.
No.
Why is
I mean,
that?
In the
Tell us more.
2014 book, I even wrote about, I mean, I haven't written the big article. I wrote a big article with Constant Long that we published in Language Teaching in 2019. And that's where we really went into great detail about it. But in the 2014 book, really wrote about, because I interviewed, I can't remember how many students, a lot, 30 something, about 35 postgraduate students in my own university for part of the research. And I was interviewing them on their views about how things were going for them they were from all around the university, a whole range of courses. I didn't actually intend to interview anyone from my own department. But then that one Chinese student emailed me and she said she'd heard from her friend that I was doing these interviews and she had a lot to say. And would I interview her? So I did. But otherwise, they weren't people I knew beforehand. The wife of one then came and did a PhD with me after that. He was in engineering, but she was interested in linguistics. And I picked up a lot of what they said. And they were talking about the placement exams, especially they did IELTS. But they found it totally unfair. I had examples where they would say they had a friend who failed, didn't get a high enough score, and she would have been absolutely fine. They knew her and they knew she would have been fine. Whereas the one person that was in their course that got 9 for IELTS, which I believe, certainly then, it was the highest score you could get. I didn't even know there was a 9. And in the December, she pulled out because she couldn't cope.
Oh,
and
wow.
I think the big problem is, and what came out of it all the time, is they didn't focus, they just focused on discrete, as in DISCRETE, discrete language phenomena. They didn't focus on communication.
Right.
They weren't focusing on how people communicate with each other and how people understand when they're being communicated with. They just focused on, do you understand and can you reproduce these versions of native English? And in any case, they didn't always have native English lecturers. They were mixing with mostly non-native English students. But they did find, I got lots of comments about how unfair things were, like the seminars. They would have, say, 15 people in a seminar group, and it was always the native English speakers who pushed forward and spoke. And there's some really funny things. A native speaker told a joke, and there were 2 Thai students, and one of them I was interviewing. This was not in my course, this was in somebody else's, like in the university. But the Thai student said her friend laughed. And I said, why are you laughing? And she said, I don't know, because everybody else did.
Everybody else is doing it too, yeah.
She asked her what the joke was. I don't know what the joke was. But they said that they needed longer to join in the conversation. But by the time they were ready to say, you've got something to say, it had moved on to the next topic, and they were never given chance. And then they were sort of little off because they didn't participate. And the whole thing is just so native, or even when there may be just 5% native English speakers in the group. But the point is that testing needs to be done. In the 2019 article, Constant and I actually suggested that they shouldn't only be testing English, because we were already into the sort of multilingual approach by then. And they should be testing, and people should be allowed to both study and be tested in other languages, not only English. And although the logistics of this would be quite tricky, but universities could agree that they were going to settle on certain languages where they would have people that could move across those languages. It would certainly show up the native English lecturers, wouldn't it?
Right.
You don't have it.
You
But we were arguing that we should have we should have other languages being tested, and in people being able to answer in other languages, and not being restricted to English. But certainly the English itself should not be based on native English.
right.
And we also, as far as English medium instruction goes, we think the UK, we don't agree with it. There's a guy called Ernesto Macaro who thinks you can't call it English medium instruction if it's in a native English speaking country. And as we keep pointing out to him and to everybody else, it's in native English speaking countries where you get the biggest mix of nationalities together.
Mhm.
And it very much is English medium instruction. So you can't exclude native English countries from it. It's still English medium instruction, and therefore it still should be tested
Yeah.
as if the students are not coming. What I really objected to is these universities in the UK, same in the US, probably Canada too, I'm not sure. They want to call themselves international universities,
Yeah.
and then they want the students to use a national version of English. And I've said you can't have both. If you want them to use a national version of English, you call yourself a national university. If you want to call yourself international, you have to have international standards, which means you accept other ways of doing things than your own local national one.